So you've permitted unmuting.
I don't use Zoom very often. We have different application at work, so trying to get more comfortable with it.
You use Teams?
Yes.
I'm so accustomed to Zoom. I'm very clumsy with Teams.
The opposite.
So who's Joseph Mellon? Oh, is he
He's a
public?
resident.
Okay. And you're planning to open the floor at some point to public comment? Okay.
Yes. Yep. That's my intent tonight.
All right. But when we get a quorum, I've got a motion to propose in terms of that procedure.
Okay. Can we cover that motion under new business?
Sure.
Okay, because it's just before the citizens forum, so.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Hey. You're off the road, right, Mark?
What's that? Yeah, I'm off.
You're off the road or on the road?
Yeah, I'm off.
How long have you had that Airstream?
I've always had a trailer. I had this particular one for about 3 years now.
You happy with it?
Yeah, I am. I'm very happy with it. It's just the two of us, so you don't need much. And if you ever go RVing, I mean, my idea of camping is like being outdoors. So I mean,
Yeah.
the only thing I do in the thing is go to sleep. You know.
So what do you tow it with?
I have a new car now, a Kia Telluride, which tows pretty well, but it's a little low. So it concerns me a little. I had a Toyota Tacoma that I towed with before, but actually the Kia has a bigger engine and it tows better. But I think I need to go back to school to learn all the electronics in this new Kia.
Yeah, right.
Like, they're crazy. It's like nuts.
Well, my best friend from high school spends a lot of the months of the year on the road. He and his wife have a trailer. I don't know the brand of it, but they tow it behind a pickup truck with a fifth wheel.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. So it's big.
Yeah, it seems to be give a lot of flexibility because they can park the thing and take the pickup, elsewhere without dragging around the whole body of the trailer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Patty.
Hey, Patty, nice to see you.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
How many members do we have now, Michelle? 8?
We have 9.
9, okay. We need
Awesome.
5.
Now I can speak. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all.
Yeah, good to see you too. We have 5. I'm gonna wait 1 more minute, see if anybody else joins, and then we'll get started.
Lynn just came in.
Yep, I see Lynn. All right, why don't we get started? Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. It's great to see everybody. Tonight, probably, hopefully we can keep the meeting to 2 hours. That's my hope. What we don't finish, we'll just roll over to the next meeting. I have other commitments tonight, so that's why. We're just gonna go through and review and approve meeting minutes and then go right into discussing the timeline for the next 6 to 8 weeks for the committee. And then I want to go back and talk about the goals and strategies and any follow-up questions to MAPC.
Yep.
And then a discussion on committee housing topics. I know we've been away for a while since we had the community engagement and the online survey. So I want to just be able to, I know a few people had sent some topics. When I originally created the agenda, we were going to originally talk about the results from the community engagement and the survey. However, one of the members of MAPC is not available due to a personal matter. We'll take those topics for next week's meeting. We've already confirmed that. And then I definitely want to leave some time, ample time for any citizen comments. So, okay. So I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. for the Nahant Housing Production Plan Committee meeting. Joining us is Michelle Capano, Chair, Michael Raworth, Lynn Spencer, Patty Karras, Mark Cullinan, and members of the public. I sent out the meeting minutes, and again, I apologize. I changed computers and email accounts, and so I'm just having some issues getting synchronized, but hopefully I got everything out to everybody. Did folks review the meeting minutes? Are there any questions, any changes, anything I need to modify before I finalize and send them over to the town clerk?
Not that I've seen. I just would suggest that it would be good to circulate the meeting minutes in much shorter time frame after each meeting, so that things are fresh in everybody's mind and get a chance to absorb them and annotate them for corrections, because it's difficult to call back to memory what happened several months ago.
Yeah, I am working on the ones from May 11th, and then we have June 8th. So I will get those out as soon as they're done and get those out to folks so they have time to review them before the next meeting. My hope is I can get to them. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes for April 13th, 2023 and May 4th, 2023?
So moved.
Second.
Michael, second. So roll call vote. Lynn?
Yes.
Patty? Okay, I'm gonna leave you, make sure you are unmuted. Patty?
Hi. Thank you.
Mark?
All right.
Great. Michael?
Aye.
And the chair is aye. Okay, great. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is the upcoming timeline for the committee. So I sent an email laying out what's going to happen over the next several weeks. So let me just get a copy of it so I can have it in front of me. Okay. All right. So for the remainder of August, we will meet next week with MAPC, and just remember that, MAPC is only meeting with us roughly on a monthly basis according to the contract. So the remaining of the time is really for the committee to continually review and challenge ideas, thoughts, feedback that we're hearing from the community, all of those things. We are going to be moving right into the draft of the HPP report, but before then, we are going to review the feedback from the community engagement and the online survey. They have been going through and synthesizing the results, analyzing them, and so hopefully we will have a draft report to talk through that next week, which will be the elements and ingredients into the final report. So it's really important over the next several weeks, if you can, adjust your calendars accordingly. Again, my hope is to keep the meetings for 2 hours on Thursday nights from 6:30 to 8:30. What we don't complete, we'll just roll over into the next meeting. So for the weeks of the 17th, we'll review those findings. And then MAPC is scheduled to have a draft of the report the week of September 11th. We will meet that Thursday to review the draft. And then it is the responsibility of the committee by the following week to finalize any feedback that you have, and you can send it in written form, email. You can send it directly to MAPC. You can cross-copy me on it, but we want to get this out. Final report done and finalized by the end of September, so we can get it into the hands of the planning board and the board of selectmen, so they can have ample time to review it. We are looking at calendars right now for the week of October 16th or the 23rd for a joint meeting of the board of selectmen and the planning board. Now, the planning board only meets monthly, so it's important that we stay on track the next several weeks and get this report finalized so the planning board has time to review it. So it's an important dependency on the work that we're doing.
Okay.
At the upcoming joint meeting, it's important that all of us attend so we can advocate for the approval of the plan. Obviously, we would expect the board to have questions for us. There could be questions from the public too. So we have to make sure that we're prepared to that. So leading up to the October meeting, we'll still be meeting to kind of talk through the plan, any other elements, anything else that needs to get fine-tuned. And then afterwards, MAPC is going to be submitting that plan to the state for their approval. And then that will help us in terms of all the activities.
Right.
Remember, we said at the very beginning, the part of our work was to create this roadmap and strategy for the town. Now, we're hoping that what we develop is, we'll have executable components that we can bring in different forms, whether it be a town meeting or, something that we already can have funding for that we can start and then really work towards, improving affordable housing needs in the town. So let me just stop there, see if there's any questions.
I have a concern. First of all, I want to take my hat off in particular to the suggestion that Lynn Spencer put forward with regard to the trust and the funding mechanism through MAPC. I mean, through the Community Preservation Act allocation. I think that's very constructive and it'll be very helpful. Apart from that, I am concerned that everything that I've seen so far seems to be largely in the category of describing things that will be nice to have rather than concrete actions that we are recommending either to the planning board in terms of zoning changes or to the selectmen in terms of making steps that will allow, for example, the Nahant Housing Authority to take steps that will actually make progress toward increasing the housing stock available to satisfy our 40B requirements. Now, the things that are described as aspirational, I think are all very good, but I don't think they provide anything that any other town body can get their teeth into. And I really am afraid that this would result in this committee coming to the end of its authorized time frame, and at the end of the budget for the consultant, without any concrete suggestions that we can pass on to somebody who's got the authority to do something about them. And unless I'm wrong about that, I think that will not be a way that we can very well acquit ourselves for all the effort that we've put into what we've done. So I'm happy to have somebody tell me how I'm seeing things wrong. But right now, with the exception of the trust mechanism and the funding source that Lynn identified, all I see is aspirational goals, which don't have any mechanism toward them being achieved, at least as is stated in what we've had put before us so far.
So we're going to I'll pull up the goals and we're going to walk through them. And I think these are the questions that we need to insert to either ask MAPC or bring back to the town administrator to say, if we had this as an action, how can we do it? Is there a funding source? Is there not a funding source? Again, this whole plan it's what it is. It's a plan, it's a strategy, and it's a roadmap. And there should be some flexibility to pick and choose within that, and obviously recognize we may have to pivot because the economics in a community can change as well, right? Mm-hmm. God forbid we have a huge, storm this winter, and it takes out the town wharf or, takes out Tudor Beach or something. All of the things that we're trying to work on might have to go on hold for a period of time. So we have to just acknowledge that, and also acknowledge that, some of this still may require other boards and committees to review, like planning board, right? We know we've talked about 3A and possibly proposing certain bylaw changes. So we need to talk about what's the priority of those changes and how to get those affected. And do we include them in this annual town meeting, the next town meeting, that's a strategy point as well. I think also, in speaking with MAPC, they did tell me that they will be able to give us some guidance on typical like programs to bring back. So one of the goals it's around, and we talked about this before, the town has not brought certain programs like a first-time home buyer program, other assistance programs back to the community. I know, like, for example, Mary Minor in her role, right, supporting the Council on the Aging, she does a lot of that right now. And it's been a result of just the needs have been happening in COVID and stuff. May have not been intended, but there are other things that we could do to help, add to that. We have a very strong veterans organization. And so we know that they're doing things now, but if there's something additive that we can do to complement that, that would be great. The other is that I was reading about was needs for singles. If you look at our data, we have a lot of single renters, single homeowners, but we don't have the housing stock for them to either downsize or acquire. So thinking through how that can help them as well. All right. So very good, Michael. I'm not objecting to anything that you said.
Yeah, let me
Okay,
just jump.
yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I agree with Mike. I think it would be nice to have some action items, as you refer to them. With those action items, who's the appropriate authority to initiate them, whether it's the Board of Selectmen or the planning board or citizens petition or whatever. I mean, we're talking basically like zoning issues and perhaps a housing trust. So how, we need to think about how those action items get implemented and who's responsible for them and how they're addressed in the housing reduction plan, I think is an important point.
And let me just say to Michelle's comments, I recognize that there's plenty of things that may come up that may affect what we do, but I don't think there's any reason for us to shrink from making specific concrete recommendations. And they're only that, they're recommendations, but that's what committees do. And the power lives in the hands of the planning board on the one hand, perhaps some respect the ZBA, and definitely the selectmen, and possibly town meeting would be required for some of the zoning requirements. But the fact that factors may come up that we haven't taken into account, that's always the case. So we have to, that cannot cause us to shrink from stepping up to the plate and making concrete definitive recommendations that the applicable boards and committees and action bodies can either modify or adopt or reject or whatever. But if we fail to provide a series of concrete recommendations, I don't think we will have done what our mandate calls for.
Okay. So I want to just take one pause here. I think I see Josie on the line. She's our new member that just was recently appointed by the town administrator. I'm going to ask her to unmute so she can introduce herself. Hopefully she can. Okay. Give her a minute or two.
While she's doing that, let me mention one other thing. I think we have to be very careful of the temptation or the problem of biting off more than this committee can chew. And in that regard, I think we need to focus on the things that we were charged with originally, which is number one, to come up with a plan, and the HPP is a function of the 40B requirement, and that how once we get a plan approved, assuming we do, that buys us a certain amount of time to take some action and get some armor against hostile 40Bs. And then the 3A requirement, which has its own deadlines and so forth, Those things are concrete and important. Now, there are other things that are valuable, which are increasing the housing stock for seniors and people who have grown up in town and so forth. Those are all very good to deal with the accessory dwelling issue. That is all very good. I really fear that we could be drowned in the multitude of things that we could potentially touch upon that deal with our core issue. And so I think we need to be very careful not to let the peripheral issues get in the way of the core issues that brought us together. If there's a way that we could have our lease on life extended to deal with some of these additional issues after we've finished with the core issues, I think that would be constructive. But I don't know that that's within the realm of possibility. But I think if we try to bite off more than we can chew, we will end up creating something that will be politically impossible to get adopted by the pertinent committees that have power to deal with them.
It's good feedback, Michael. Thank you. So I think everyone can see Josie. She's in her car driving, so I don't want to disrupt her. So for her safety, but you know, she'll hopefully be joining us again, you know, orally, and then we'll wait for you to meet her and hear from her. Yeah, see if I can.
Welcome, Josie.
Welcome, Josie. Glad to have you.
Hello, Josie. Don't let us distract you.
It looks like she's still on mute, though.
Yeah, yeah, she's driving. We can't hear you. You're still on mute, but don't drive. Your safety's first.
Don't unmute and drive.
Yes. All right. So we've covered the timeline and upcoming deliverables. I'm going to actually pull up the goals. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. Can people see my screen?
No,
No,
Can you see it now?
coming. There we
Yep.
go.
Awesome. Okay. Again, I'm still navigating Zoom here. Okay. So we've as a committee have reviewed this document and have talked about it. All of this was included in the community engagement as well as the survey. So I wanted to go back through and kind of highlight and maybe get into more detailed conversation around the goals and strategies.
Right.
So, you know, things that the 5 pillars, as I call them, were around expand the little to middle housing options, produce an uppercase A affordable housing, reduce the instability for seniors in those vulnerable households, support first-time home ownership, and then harmonize housing needs with sustainability. That 5th one's Jim. I always like reading that one because Jim, I know, was very passionate about that. Okay, so I want to actually jump down to the strategies overview. So the first section is around building the capacity building strategies. And Michael had talked about the housing trust and establishing the housing trust. And I think what we were saying is we're already setting aside 10% from community preservation. That would be actually the seed money that would go into a housing trust. Do I understand that correctly?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's the minimum amount, yes.
And are we comfortable at making a recommendation to increase that 10%?
My suggestion is, sorry, Elaine, go ahead.
So the minimum is 10%, but I think you can ask for more. You can ask for, $100,000, $150,000. The question really is housing trusts are oftentimes started by the seed money from community preservation, but there can be linkage funds. If there were to be a development here in Nahant, you could require linkage funding be contributing to the housing trust.
Okay. And Lynn, when you talk about linkage funding, like, is that funding coming from like
The developer,
developer? Okay, that's
Yeah,
what I want
yeah.
to understand.
the
Okay.
developer, yeah.
And so the
So
other
hi,
piece-
yeah, this is Josephina. I do, if I may. I have a comment. I think there are many taxpayers who are very concerned that a large portion of tax money will be used for affordable housing development. While I absolutely support seed money, it is important to note, both in this meeting and in any subsequent meetings with residents, that an enormous amount of tax money is not going to be set aside to develop affordable housing. And that this trust is only a vehicle for a seed money, which is limited, and state funds or developer funds that will be later donated or put into that trust. Very important, very sensitive topic for many residents, that town funds should not be allocated, or the burden of creating affordable housing should not be on the residents. It should be on private developers, private organizations like Habitat for Humanity, or other charitable organizations. Thank you.
Well, I don't know that that's an adequate source of funding to achieve what we need to achieve in order to gain protection from hostile 40B.
Well,
Yeah.
again, I understood in the beginning of this meeting that we were talking about, not expanding what our mission is. But if we look at the different options that are available to the community, there's more than just building affordable housing. Many places that I've lived in the United States have asked for tax reductions for persons who are willing to rent under a certain amount, under the poverty level at the affordable housing prices to residents. And then what would happen is they could look at providing an annual lease to show that it's at the affordable level. And in many states, including potentially Massachusetts, that would fit the bill versus having to create and build new buildings. I think this committee needs to look at more options than what I've heard to date. And that is the reason why I've joined the committee.
I think, Michelle, we just should ask our consultant to identify revenue sources for the Housing Trust Fund. And there are a number of them. But they have the experience in this. They know how trust funds throughout the state are being funded, where the revenue is coming from. So maybe a list from them of the sources would be helpful for us to review.
And then my recommendation again is, when this is messaged to the general public, it is very important to note that we are exploring all options and that the full burden is not met for the taxpayers of Nahant to establish or to end up funding. Thank you.
Lynn, I had one other question about CPC.
Sure.
Just using this as an estimate, can't recall the rough numbers, but annually, if we gather $500,000 from CPC and 10% goes to the housing trust,
it goes towards,
sorry,
it
CPC goes to housing, I'm sorry.
yeah, it goes towards community housing, whether it's a trust or whatever.
Okay.
Goes towards that.
That rate, that percentage could still be increased, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So there's three categories: historic preservation, open space and recreation, and community housing. Each get 10% at minimum. The balance, 70%, gets allocated based on grant applications that are reviewed by the committee and then recommended to the town meeting for their vote. And it's only a town meeting vote that something gets put into play.
And
So
if we
Lynn,
were to
what's-
change the ratios across those three categories, does that require a town meeting vote?
No, so it's a grant application process, Michelle. So we actually,
Oh, okay. So they can determine if you don't have anything for open space and historic preservation, you could say 70% could go to housing.
it could be,
It's-
yeah.
Okay.
It's competitive.
Quite a bit, yeah.
Each allocation competes with the others.
Okay,
Right.
And that's each year too. So
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
okay.
And the
And
other
Lynn, Lynn,
Go ahead.
can you just tell us what the CPA allocation or total funds to be distributed roughly has been each year in the past?
They varied, Michael, based on the state match. Last year, we were looking at 100% state match, so, we were rising on $500,000. But it does vary. And if you treat
Sure.
yourself to a review of the CPA, annual report, you can go back over time and see, the amounts that have been awarded every year since this started in 2004.
Right. Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
I interrupted somebody.
It's
Sure.
okay, but my, Lana, are the reserves in housing in the Preservation Trust Fund?
There's a small reserve at this point. We have actually for housing, I'll take a moment to look because it's always a danger to say something off the top of your head. There's a fairly good sized general reserve as well. That's rising on $200,000, but I think the amount that's actually in the housing reserve is quite a bit less.
So, I mean, as Josie mentioned, I think we have the ability, if the town does decide to choose a housing trust fund that without impacting directly the taxpayers, we have seed money to start that.
That's right. That's why I had suggested that community preservation exists not as an additional burden on the taxpayers. It's something that we voted in years ago. It's matched by the state. So it gives us it's not a huge amount of money, but it gives us a start, and it actually is a stake in the ground.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
so,
to my
Yeah.
point, what I've heard, and this is just my concern, is last time I was in a town meeting, I heard a gentleman, and I can't remember his name, stand up. And he was very forcibly, and to his point, was stating that the town had to build these buildings. And from folks that I spoke to, there was a lot of concern about raising the tax base to try to pay for this. And I would just recommend that I'm all for building a trust. And I know, because I've written grants for decades, that we are able to fund it through state grants, private funding, Habitat for Humanity for certain. I was on directors of Habitat for Humanity, Fairfield County in Connecticut. But the messaging needs to be very clear. And the mission of that trust needs to be very clear to the residents of Nahant, that there are already allocations in place that we are going to use for seed money. It's not the intent to recommend additional tax burdens on the Nahant residents to make this happen. That's my only point. Thanks.
thank you. I appreciate that, Josie. By the way, the exact amount in the reserve fund for housing is $5,817. So it's not much, because we've been actually
Right.
funding work on the existing buildings that are owned by the housing authority.
Fair enough.
To another point that Josie raised is that, there are alternatives to actually direct, creating direct units. You could create housing vouchers.
Yes.
It takes the initiative of a committee like this, or the planning board, or the housing authority, to apply to community preservation for that kind of subsidy.
Okay, Michelle, can we task the committee with advising us as to the comparative desirability of the various mechanisms that have been touched upon here, such as housing vouchers, such as outright purchase and lease to qualifying individuals, such as payments to individuals who are private landowners to subsidize them in making rentals available, or deed restricting their property. Because I think we need to have a good understanding of all the alternatives of achieving increases in the numbers of the housing stock, the SHI.
Okay,
One other point here on the housing trust, Michelle, if you could ask our consultants, there are a number of different versions of the trust and how it's administrated, in the administration of the trust. And some of them, I think it seems to be dependent on the size of the community. So perhaps MAPC could tell us, if we were to adopt a housing trust fund, what sort of administration, what sort of form that trust should take.
no, meaning whether someone is elected to the board or appointed to the board, how the
Yeah,
trust
I'll-
is put together, how the funds
Yep.
are administrated,
Right.
who pays out the funds, like all of that stuff. Okay,
All that
yep,
stuff.
Yeah.
great.
And there are plenty of housing trusts that I see in my work throughout the state that are associated with community preservation support that would be good models to consider.
Let me also just supplement. I'd seen something in the research I'd done about 40B that says that creating rental properties
Right.
that qualify under the SHI are the most advantageous to a town as distinct from the other options. So I'd just like to get clarity from the consultant about that, because we definitely want to look at the strategy that gets us the greatest leverage for any kind of effort that we make.
So Michael, on that point though, we have to think about the burden of managing those rental properties currently, because we have 48 units we manage right now. And if we take on, say, an additional 10 or 20 more rental units, right, there's an additional cost that's going to be needed for the Nahant Housing Authority to support that. So vis-a-vis, that is going to come out of the general fund to pay for anything that's, maintenance, all of that stuff.
Sure,
Okay.
those are to be considered, absolutely. But we also, I mean, that may be a small cost compared to the benefit we get by choosing rental versus wholly owned. So
Yep.
I don't pretend to have all the answers on it. I think we just need to consider that, together with the costs of the rental administration. We're obviously doing some rental administration now. So what's the delta going to be if we add to the housing stock that is rented?
Well, there's more than rental administration, Michael, there's maintenance, right?
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
All of those are things,
Yeah.
they all need to be considered. But the point is, that's not a basis not to consider rental, because
No,
rental
That's not
gives
what
us
I'm
the
saying.
greatest leverage.
I'm just saying
Okay.
those are the things need to make sure that whatever the
Sure.
recommendations are, and, I can't speak for the Nahant Housing Authority. We can only assume, they're gonna need to take this under advisement. Okay, so the next one I wanted to cover was hire a part-time planner or on-demand consultant to support housing planning initiatives. But the first thing that comes out of when I read this one is, where's the funding for the salary gonna come from? It could come from CPC to support this, since it's not related to housing. But is this something we still feel like, do we need a city planner? I think places like, Somerville, Lynn, that have city planners that look at all of this. And I don't know if this would make sense for us in terms of, meeting the needs for affordable housing.
I would
Or
submit
can-
we can defer decision on this until we have more concrete steps available before us, and figure out, in light of the concrete recommendations that we're going to make, how much need there is to hire additional staff.
I second that recommendation.
Yeah, I would agree also. And if the town were to decide on a housing trust fund, there would be a director of that trust, and perhaps that person could largely fill that role.
Okay. All right, so the next section is under regulatory strategies. So the first one was to create a zoning bylaw allowing accessory dwelling units by right with development standards. I think some of the key things here is this mapping analysis that will inform on the development of the bylaw by showing the most suitable locations for attached, detached, and internal ADUs. So what I put as a questionnaire in here is, who or how does this mapping analysis get done? You know, do we need additional funding from the town, or is this something that MAPC can do for us? I don't have the answer to that, but I put it as a follow-up question.
I would suggest that it's a valuable initiative to consider ADUs, but the whole phenomenon of changing zoning to allow for that is a big deal, and there are plenty of unanticipated consequences that could come from a hasty decision on it. I think it's got a huge potential to create a very big political backlash. And while I think that the initiative is a valuable thing to look at, I think that we need this needs quite a bit more study before we go marching into changing the zoning, because the difficulty is that a first cut approach to it, let's say, give everybody the right to achieve an accessory dwelling unit, could be spun by opponents as basically turning Nahant into a potentially huge slum with ill-considered dwelling units occupied by who knows who all over the place without any input from neighbors and so forth. So some of the concerns might be legitimate, but I see a huge potential political problem in dealing with this, other than through very careful study.
Mike, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you. Michelle, I think we need to do a little bit more research on this, but and I could be wrong here, but it's my understanding that it may not require a zoning change.
Yeah.
It simply requires the town to adopt the provisions of Mass General Law, and if in so doing, through that adoption, it would be a right for homeowners to have an ADU. Now, the town can control the what types of ADUs are permissible in terms of, are they detached? Are they not detached? Is it a owner occupied ADU type of situation or not? But I don't know, Lynn, you may know more about this than I do, but I don't think it's a zoning change.
Fair enough. I may be incorrect about zoning change, but the point is that this is a huge change in land use policy that has been in existence for a long time, and there are going to be plenty of people who are very motivated to disparage it. So, I mean, you might be right, Mark. We could adopt the state regulation, but the downstream what do you say, regulations on what kind of ADU and so forth can be adapted are going to be hugely controversial. So it may be that there's good things to be done, but I think that this is something that is potentially very explosive.
So
It's could I just jump in? Because Michael, you're so articulate. Sorry. It's always hard for me to actually, be against you. But I would just point out that there are numerous existing ADUs that are in fact illegal all over Nahant, all over. And in fact, and I'm looking out here from my window, probably 3 of them. And then tradition very often in Nahant was for the year-rounders to have actually a small house that they would go to, and on their property, there's a couple of them, and live in and rent their big houses or their larger houses to summer residents. So I think we have some precedent here, but I will say this, probably because I was at the last open house session, I was at the table where I was struck by how the searching questions I got about what would constitute a legal ADU, and did it have to be occupied by a family member and all kinds of things. So I think you are very right. There are lots of granular aspects of this that need to be sorted out. But the precedent exists here in Nahant for these in-place ADUs. And the question is, can we make what is now illegal legal? And is that a benefit?
I think you're right, Lynn. I agree 100%. And I agree with Mike that if we decide to roll this out, we need to make sure all the boxes are checked.
Yeah, very careful, but
Very carefully. So I would ask MAPC to identify similar communities to Nahant that have adopted the provisions of Mass General Law that allow residents as a matter of right to have ADUs, so that perhaps we can take a look at those, how they structured that.
And can
Well,
I
know the city
submit,
of Salem has done it.
and can I submit, there's two things that pop into my mind as questions. When we are looking for similarly situated towns like Nahant, looking at Lynn and Swampscott are not similarly situated. They're local, but they're not the same. So I would like to submit to the committee that we identify which ones we're looking at. Somerville is not similar to us. We're a small island community. And so I submit that we look for similarly situated towns throughout Massachusetts. The second thing that I would like to submit is that if you do roll out this zoning change, it's my recommendation that we do not make targeted areas. I think that is unfair to other areas and other neighborhoods, that if you are going to roll it out, it should be across the town. The third thing is I'd like a recommendation there that if we do move forward with that, not only just putting adjacent apartments, but also perhaps being able to take those larger homes and convert them into condos easier than it might be currently. That would definitely encourage home ownership, and it would also increase the stock for affordable and capital affordable as well. So something to consider, 3 different recommendations. Thanks.
Yeah, very good ones, Josie, and I agree with you. But and I particularly agree that it should be town-wide, and I believe if you accept the provisions of Mass General Law, it is town-wide. It isn't. You cannot target it for one area over the other.
All right, so I think that was good. I'm going to move on to the next one. The next one was to allow small to medium-sized housing types in residential districts. So we know we have different residential district zones where some of them require, a lot size of 20,000 square feet. So this would require a zoning change, I believe, to reduce those. So you could actually subdivide those lots and allow to increase the housing stock.
I suggest that this needs to be looked at in the same context with the ADUs. I think, distinguishing the kind of dwellings that are addressed in this thing from ADUs is a sort of an artificial distinction. I think you're talking about increasing the density of dwellings, whether it be by ADUs or what you call tiny houses or whatever. I think that's a change of it's a difference in terminology, but not in effect. So I think that needs to be addressed with the ADU situation, so that all of those things which would increase density are addressed together.
But do we feel like if this would be a recommendation to review the zoning bylaws and reduce the minimum size in some of those, R districts?
I'm a huge proponent of, of taking a look at existing zoning bylaws. What we have basically 2 districts, with 30,000 square feet and 10,000 square feet. And if you look at the town and the development of the town, that clearly is, if you go over to Bass Point, the average lot size may be 3,000, 3,500 square feet. You go to Little Nahant, it may be 4,000 square feet. You go to Central Nahant, it's another. So, I think we really need to, and I'm not saying that, some areas are more dense than others, just the way they are. And when you look at things like the Coast Guard housing, for example, there was a and I think the town supported it, that they realized that, you know, having a 10,000 square foot lot there with a floor area ratio of 45% or whatever it was, would be like putting a fish in a tree. I mean, it just doesn't fit. And so I do think, and again, as Mike said, it's going to require a lot of work, and it might be outside the realm of what we're trying to do here initially, but to take a more comprehensive look at our zoning requirements, for sure.
Okay, good. All right.
Can I just interrupt and ask Mark to give us a brief update on what is going to go on with the housing, Coast Guard housing at the next town meeting?
So
Yeah,
Michael, I'm going
and-
to stop you there. Wait a minute.
Okay,
It's
go
out of-
ahead. Thank
Exactly.
you.
We can take it under new business, but it's
Okay,
out of
go ahead.
order right now,
Okay,
for the agenda.
Fair enough. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the next one, which was utilize 40R zoning with built-in affordable requirements to comply with the 3A zoning. So in my notes I put in here is I wanted to understand more about this SGOD template for zoning and how to use this for the smart overlay for this. And I think we've talked about this before, that we would just allow a complete overlay for the entire town for 3A. So they could build by right to make those changes.
I would be
under-
glad to be, sorry, to be better educated about this. I don't quite understand it. I think I'm in your camp, Michelle, about that.
Hmm.
But I think that I'm a little bit concerned about the idea that every part of town is eligible for the MBTA enhanced density. We may not need to do that. We may be able to achieve it without making big zoning changes, but I do think we need more education about it.
Okay,
Yeah, and for my point of view, I would defer that question because we still need to understand if other options would fit the need for affordable housing, like vouchers and tax breaks. So there may not be a need to create more housing. So I would recommend we defer that for now, but definitely I've heard quite a few of the residents state that if you are going to create zoning, it should be across the whole town and not just in targeted areas.
Well, the 3A does not involve creating housing.
Yeah.
Simply is a zoning change that allows a developer to build multifamily up to a certain quantity in an area that hadn't been previously permitted. So that doesn't involve the town's budget. It's just a change in zoning that permits greater density, just to clarify.
So that being said, thank you for that clarification. I think it's too early to address that issue until other options are explored.
so based on our timeline right now, Josie, one of the commitments we have as part of the work that we're doing is we will put forth something related to MBTA 3A communities to be compliant. So we'll try to work as quickly as possible to try to get this one, drawn out.
I mean, I agree that this requires a deeper dive. And I agree, and Mike, you're right. I think we're not required to create more housing here under 3A. There are some areas that we could perhaps take a look at that already exist, like the Edge Hill or the Rockledge or Bass Point Apartments, where an overlay area could be laid there because they already exist. And that's a possibility.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. I mean, we already have buildings that can be added to versus creating new buildings.
Right.
And again, whether the options I don't believe have been fully explored, we can take a current building that's not in use, for example, and sell it to Habitat for Humanity. They would go in and do all the work to make it affordable homeownership versus affordable rentals. There's a lot more to be said before we start changing zoning laws, is my recommendation.
Just to clarify, Josie, 3A doesn't have anything to do with affordability. It's totally independent of the price. It's simply a matter of density and allowing zoning or changing zoning to permit multifamily housing where that wasn't permitted before. But I do think I think we need to ask our consultants to tell us whether Mark's point is a valid one. In other words, can we achieve what 3A requires by a zoning change that would essentially take advantage of existing high density places such as Edge Hill, et cetera? Or do we have to do something that provides for high density zoning that doesn't currently exist?
The only other place there might be a Greystone Road could fall under that category. But, if you look at Greystone Road, the Edge Hill, the Rockledge, Bass Point Apartments, I mean, that might meet the threshold of 3A.
If we can do it that way, that would solve one big problem, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So Mike, we can go back to your earlier question. So explore updating the Coast Guard housing development site. So I put some notes here. And this is when I was reviewing it. So I believe the Board of Selectmen does not have to move forward with the vote. A new article could be presented at town meeting modifying what was approved in 2021. But I guess for our committee is, would we recommend, re-looking at the existing plans and making some modifications so that site could be developed for affordable housing in such a way that, the note can still be paid, but then whatever else is preserved could be considered, for a project.
Well, what we do depends a lot on what is before the town pursuant to this town meeting, and I have not seen the warrant article. Maybe Mark can fill us in about what the town will be asked to vote on in September.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's a funding article, bonding article to provide funds, additional funds needed to raise the properties and clean the properties, to either currently what's before us is the 2021 town meeting vote, which was to authorize the Board of Selectmen to demolish, clean the sites, and to sell the sites, and to pay off the debt. So anything different than that is definitely going to require a new town meeting vote, and I'm not opposed to that. But right now, what we have in front of us is the town meeting vote. I think what Michelle is asking is, as a committee, do we recommend something that is different than what has already been voted on? And I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think it needs to have some caveats. I would agree that if we can accomplish two things here, pay off the debt and provide by selling properties, lots, and provide some affordable housing opportunities there, that would be the best outcome, in my opinion. But that would require a town meeting vote.
Well, as I understand it, the 2021 vote authorized the selectmen to dispose of the properties, did not require it. Is that much correct?
That's correct.
And what the current article will call for is to raise funds to demolish the existing structures. Is that right?
That's right.
So that means that the authority to sell them still exists as before, correct?
That's right.
And of course, it doesn't require the selectmen to do anything. So but further changes to what happens to those properties might require yet a third town meeting vote, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I suppose that somebody at town meeting could stand up and give some sort of a report on what this committee thinks ought to be done. Actually, that would not be, we're just looking for funding to demolish, right?
Yeah, so I think that would be premature, Mike.
Yep.
I really do, because, whatever happens there, whether it's a new town meeting or not, those buildings have to come down.
Well, it's more
Okay.
than that. It's the buildings need to be raised. The oil tanks need to be removed.
The site needs
the land, the site has to be remediated of contaminants. So there's 3 big pieces of activities there to preserve, to clean that land to be ready to put a single family or whatever development home over there. So that's quite a big effort if you think about it.
That's true, but it's all in the vein of cleaning things up so as to provide the town with a clean slate of decisions to make. In other words, it would remove any impediment to selling the land due to a brownfields issue or something like that. So it's a sort of a cleanup action, but still leaves the town in a position of deciding what to do with the properties. Have I misunderstood anything?
I think
So
that's
may I ask a historical question, please? Because I've done brownfield remediation in my life. Has that property already been declared a brownfield by the state or the federal?
No,
No,
no.
All right. So what we're speaking about is raising funds because you cannot sell the property as is to the underground oil tanks. Is that correct?
The town
you
wants
could.
the town wants to make sure that it's clean of any potential. We want a clean site before we sell the properties.
But is
diminish
there a
liability.
possibility to sell them as is with a release for folks who are willing to buy the property as is with the buildings on them? Have we explored that?
I probably, as a member of the board, wouldn't support that. I don't think my colleagues would. I think we want to make sure that the site is clean, that it's certified, and so that we're not exposed in the future for a landowner coming back to the town saying, "You
Well,
sold
that's
me."
what releases are for. Respectfully, that's what releases are for.
They may achieve that effect, but that doesn't mean that's what the town wants to do or needs to do.
Right. But I submit that, there is another option. It's not currently a brownfield. If it was, we can get state funding to remediate the property. We would have to pay for it. However, there is the option to authorize the selectmen to sell the property as is, as long as there is a release of liability within the sale of the property.
No, the
Right
2021
now, that
town.
hasn't been brought forward, but that could be an option that could be brought forward to
No,
serve
the
additional
vote
funds for the town.
The vote at 2021 town meeting was to raise the properties and clean the sites.
Okay. Well, then if that was it, then I support that the 2021 town meeting be supported.
All right, so we'll move on to the next one under the policy strategies. It was to utilize publicly owned sites identified in the HPP for affordable housing development combined with recreational spaces. So I think talked about this one too, where the priority is, given that we did an inventory, we tried to identify all these locations. We felt like we should probably lean on, town-owned land first as options. And then we identified some things that we didn't know about previously that were town-owned that, increased the opportunity of, different locations. So I think that's still in play, as I understand.
That sounds like it makes sense to me. I would just suggest that getting an HPP in place and approved, as I understand it, requires a plan that the town will conform to, that requires measurable progress in terms of adding units to the inventory each year.
Yes.
And I suggest that we, in order to do a complete job, need to identify and recommend specific actions in terms of acquisitions or whatever for each year going forward, to have a plan that's not going to run into a brick wall 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road and make us once again vulnerable to a hostile 40B. I think we need to think this through and identify specific sites, at least for consideration, to be
So we did that.
added.
We did that through the survey. And so I think what we should do is wait till next week to see what the results are from the survey, to see what the residents have provided as feedback. because there could be information in there that will give us the direction for the plan to say, you know, the results could skew and say, you know, at 80% of the response, it said, you know, build out Greystone Road. I have no idea. I'm just using that as an example, right? Or, you know, another 65% could say, you know, or build out the Coast Guard housing and repeal the vote or something like that, right? I think we really need to see those results because in my mind, that's the citizens telling us this is what they want. You know, that's their feedback, and I think we should honor it.
And to that point, Michelle, I'm still going to bring up my earlier point. Building is not the only option. So to recommend something right now without exploring all the other options, I believe to be highly premature.
So when would you expect to recommend it?
I really believe that we can meet the goals of affordable housing through vouchers, like I've seen so many other cities and towns do, plus what we have currently. And then if that is not met, well, my question too is also, and I brought this up to Michelle privately, is that the definition of family, both in the census from the federal government and practically every state, every town and county throughout the United States, is a one person or more in a household. We currently have a definition of family on the books at the town of Nahant. So what is important to me is to see that that recommendation for affordable housing will include all studio apartments and not just 2 bedrooms or more that are family friendly. So I think there's a lot of options that have to be explored and understanding of the report and what it truly meant. I don't believe building is the way. That's my personal opinion, but it's certainly open to that concept. But it seems as if this committee is driving to building versus exploring every other option available to it that's common throughout the country.
I actually don't agree with you.
Yeah, I don't agree that we're driving towards building. I think we're trying to
I-
find the best use of what is available in order that makes sense for our community.
Yeah.
Because we know people have said they want to keep the characteristic of the town the same. How do we do
Right.
that? It could be, you know, a thoughtful development. I like the idea of the vouchers, but that also requires some administration, right? And, you know, audits of these properties to make sure they're compliant, right? They meet all the requirements for rental from health and safety and all of that. And, you know, they're able to show evidence that they are renting to an income qualified person that only is allowed up to a certain means. And then we can work with this, you know, and adjust their taxes appropriately. I think that's reasonable, but we also need to make sure we have to limit it. It can't be for everybody, right? You know, there has to be qualifications to apply as a property owner, and then we can't create an unnecessary tax burden because we allowed 200 properties to be on rental assistance, right?
I
'Cause
think
then
that next week will help us because Josie and the consultant will be on the same call. And we can get their readout on the applicability and usefulness of vouchers. I don't recall those as having been discussed before, but maybe I missed it. But we need to understand what the ramifications of relying on vouchers are as compared to the other options.
Yeah, the challenge is we have very limited legal multifamilies in town, but we have many unidentified illegal multifamilies in town, right? And so it's those property owners that will say, yeah, I want to sign up. And we're going to have to come and audit their property and say, you have an illegal apartment, right? But we'll accommodate you. And I think that's fair if we can come to an agreement on what those like requirements and regulations and all of that stuff. I don't want to refrain anybody from doing that. I want everybody to be inclusive. And it's, I think for the property owner, they're going to be scratching their head as well, will my property qualify? Don't know until that property audit happens, right?
You mean
So
under 40?
yeah, my understanding of vouchers, and I've seen this, is that really you just need a certificate of occupancy through the town, which they would need to get anyway if they were applying for a regular apartment. There are no additional requirements in most states. Again, I would like to see if there are any other requirements. The state also provides the voucher The thought of perhaps, supplementing it with a tax incentive is not necessary, but it might be a good way for the town to help promote those folks that normally wouldn't want to rent to folks that qualify for affordable housing. I do also am a proponent of building if necessary, but I would really like to see other options explored first before there's a larger drive to build. That's all. I'm fine with building. Like I said, I was a member of the Habitat for Humanity District board, so I'm all for it. I think it's wonderful. But, one could be vouchers for rentals and the other one could be for affordable housing for limited income or the seniors.
I think that's good. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. So the next one was adopt a community impact fee for short-term rentals. I believe we voted on that at the last town meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with that.
I know, for the
I don't-
non-owner occupied, but for owner occupied, I think we have that in place.
Well,
Okay.
I don't
I mean,
know.
it's-
I just noticed in Texas that a judge said it was unconstitutional.
The impact fee?
No, I'm just saying for the
Oh, the non-owner occupied because it,
non-occupy, yeah.
yeah, it violates interstate commerce. Yeah, I just saw
Yeah.
that ruling a few weeks ago and I
Mhm.
sent it
It'd be
to
interesting
Dan
to see
Scarp.
what the Attorney General says about that.
Yeah, but that's not within our ambit. We don't, it's all
Right,
done by
exactly.
town meeting. We don't have anything to say about it.
Okay. Then the next one was explore possible expansion of existing property tax reduction volunteer program offered for income eligible seniors. Mark, don't we already have this right now?
Yes, we have abatements.
Yes. Well, we have abatements, but don't we have a work program as well?
Yes,
with
we do.
senior? Okay.
Yeah.
So then the next one is adopt the new state building codes to ensure new development enhance energy efficient and climate resilience. I don't know, and this is not something how I well versed in this, but I would be curious, like, how is this done? How do we engage and update inspectional services? Do we have to change our zoning bylaws? And I look at this as like, if this is a quick win, we should be doing it for like the next town meeting.
It's a bylaw change, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it appears to be, and I'm with you, Michelle. I don't know enough about it, so perhaps MAPC could educate us next meeting.
Okay. Great. Okay, the next one is promote existing state programs, improve housing and stability in aging place. So programs that would reduce housing costs, such as weatherization programs, to reduce utility costs, direct rental utility payments. There's quite a bit in here.
Yeah.
Bringing in organizations like ARP that can do workshops, first-time home buyer programs. I think that's another one that would be that would help the community get more educated, and it gives them access to these things that they may have not considered before.
Yeah, and I think ADUs feed into that strategy also.
You think what, Mark?
I think
ADUs?
ADUs figure into this strategy of aging in place. What are good things to do to allow people to be more successful in aging in place, and it's like bringing a younger family into your home would be one of them. It's
Mhm.
yeah. Okay.
No, I think that's good. Okay,
Well, you skipped one.
that is the end of
You skipped the last
program.
one.
No, the federal one, you skipped
was
the last
first-time
one.
home buyer. The last one was promote existing federal and state first-time home buyer programs. I kind of combined the two under the
Okay.
programming strategies. Okay,
I think we're all in violent agreement about that.
yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, so the next item on our agenda was just to discuss on any other committee housing topics. Michael, I know you had a few. I know Josie, you had a few. So Michael, if you want to start, I'll give you a few minutes to go through. We're at 7:42. And my hope is that around 8:10, we leave time for any public comment.
Well, there's something I want to do with regard to public comment at new business, and I think I've covered my concerns
Okay,
so far with regard to in the course of our discussions, at least as far as I can remember.
Okay. Awesome. Anyone that had any other discussion on community housing topics that you wanted to talk about?
I think we covered most of it. in
Okay,
strategy.
all right.
The only thing that I would like to reiterate is I'd like to see the definition of a one-person household reviewed with the reports to make sure that the number of affordable housing that is required is aligned with that one person. I did not feel comfortable that that was the case at the last committee meeting. And I would just like to have assurances as well as other residents that have spoken to me. Because, for example, it may or may not be true. I heard that Bass Point Apartments weren't used. I heard no mention of the Anchorage being identified. I heard no mention of potentially group homes for disabled folks, nor did I hear potentially any senior living situations, senior living places being identified. Those are all identified in other states and other counties, as far as I am aware. So I would
Not
like
sure
to.
So,
I-
so can you say
identif-
I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Identified for what, Josie? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
What was the basis of stating how many affordable units need to be used or need to be created or promoted within the town? My understanding was that one family, it had to be family friendly. And what I heard, and it could be a misunderstanding, which needs to be clarified, is that Bass Point Apartments wasn't looked at, the Anchorage wasn't looked at, all because they were studios or one bedrooms. That does not meet the definition of a family under either our town regulations or anywhere else. So I would just like to have confirmation that the one person household definition of a family was used when that report was put together.
Josie, I'm
Josie, did you-
I'm a little confused. When you're saying it's to be used for what purpose? To meet our threshold for like 40B or something?
For whatever, affordable, yes. Just want to make
Well-
sure that the baseline was a one-person household, which could live in a studio or a group home or anything like that.
I think that the consultant will be in a position to answer that for us.
Yeah.
They have the technicalities available to them. But kindly bear in mind that if if you're arguing for including greater numbers than were currently used in tallying the number of households in Nahant, that's going to drive up the number that we've got to have in our affordable housing inventory for purposes of avoiding a hostile 40B. So we need to be careful about what we wish
Well,
for, because we might get it.
I don't think we need to be careful. I think we need to be accurate and consistent. And if that drives it up, fine. If it drives it down, fine. But we do have a definition. And so we have to look at that definition and make sure that the report aligns with it. And it could go either way. I completely understand that, but I just want to make sure that it is aligned.
So I don't think the report really calls out the definition. So when I say report, so first of all, did you review the housing needs assessment?
Yep.
Okay, so in the housing needs assessment, it does talk about Nahant household. And the Nahant household is around approximately 2.01. And the data that they leveraged was the US Census data. So to your point around what constitute a family, I don't think that definition really is called out in the report. But it's a good question that we can take back to the consultants and say, hey, how do you define a family? What did you use? Was this considered in your thinking or in your framework or methodology when the housing needs assessment was put together?
Right.
That will give us direction either way, but we do
Right.
have a definition of family. If we feel that that definition of family in the zoning bylaws needs to be amended and updated or enhanced in such a way, we can definitely propose that, and we can definitely, I sit as an alternate member on the planning board, so I can definitely put it in front of them as a
Yeah.
recommendation for something that. they
But
can do
that's not
in the
what I
future.
recommend. Yeah, I don't recommend that we change it to a two-person, which is the average household in Nahant that may have been used as
Let me just suggest that the number of households that
definitions.
we've been, the number of households we've been dealing with is a number that's tallied according to the definitions in the 40B statute with which our consultant is very familiar. It has nothing to do with zoning. Zoning only applies in terms of the 3A MBTA situation. And we need to keep those separated. So I don't recall exactly what triggers one household being added to the number according to 40B, but the consultants do, and those definitions may be different than in the federal statute. So there may be numbers that are different in the purview of different laws, but we need to be careful not to confuse them, because the consultants have used the tallying criterion that applies to 40B.
And I would like to see where that's called out in 40B, because that would be, in my mind, potentially a direct conflict with the definition of what a family is in the census in every town in America. One
That
person
may be,
household.
that may
Yeah,
be,
and I just
but
wanna
the
know,
law is the
right.
law.
Laws can be challenged, sir.
All right, so good discussion. I've taken some notes. I'm going to be sending out a follow-up email, kind of memorializing what we talked about with the goals and strategies to send to the MAPC tomorrow, so everyone will be included, and additional questions. And if I missed something, let me know. We can always follow up again with them. Okay, I don't have any old business, but is there any old business before the committee that anyone wanted to discuss? No, okay. So committee new business. Is there anything? I don't have anything, but Michael, I don't know if you had, I think
Yeah,
you had one thing.
Before we open the discussion to public input, I would like to move that the committee authorize the chair to impose a limit on the comments of any particular citizen to a time period, well, to a time period which may be as short as 5 minutes in the discretion of the chair.
I'll second that for a matter of discussion.
I think it's important to have procedures in place to be able to have reasonable regulations on the time that's consumed by any particular commenter.
Yeah, I agree, Mike, and I think the chair already has that ability.
Well, if that's the
and,
case, then there won't be any harm in confirming it through this vote.
okay.
So if I think I understand, the motion before the committee is for the purposes of community feedback and public input, just to limit public comments to 5 minutes per
At the
person,
discretion of the chair.
at the discretion of the chair. Mark has seconded it for discussion. Does anyone else have any feedback or comments before we vote? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Michael,
Aye.
Patty,
Hi.
Lynn,
You're muted, Lynn.
Eating crackers. Aye.
Josie,
Didn't want you to hear.
Okay, point of clarification. I'm sorry, I'm driving. I didn't hear. Was it for the town meeting or was it for
No.
the committee meeting?
just for
For-
this committee's meeting.
I will abstain.
Abstain, okay. Mark,
I will say aye, but again, I think you have that discretion already.
I believe I do, so and the chair is aye. So the votes were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yes, and 1 abstain. So the motion carries. Okay, thank you. All right, if there's no new business, we're gonna open it up to Citizens Forum. We thank the members of the community for calling in for tonight's meeting. If you can just raise your hand and I will look to try to unmute everybody so folks can speak. Please be respectful of time for 5 minutes, and we're happy to take your questions or comments. And if you want to put something in the chat, I'm also making that available as well. So the members of the public should be able to unmute themselves. Okay, if we don't have any questions, then I have 7:52 May I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Second,
Okay, we have a second, we have a so move from Mark and a second from Michael. So we're gonna
Yep.
do a roll call vote. Michael,
aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
Patty,
Aye.
Josie,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
the chair is aye. We are adjourning at 7:52 PM. Thanks, everybody. It was a great discussion. I'll get these notes out to everybody and have a wonderful weekend if I don't see you or talk to you.
You too,
Thank you,
Michelle. Good
Michelle.
job.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much for your
Bye-bye.